There we go.
Hey!
Hey!
Legend.
Apologies for being a few minutes later. I hope we got a heads up from Charlotte that we were running a bit behind schedule today.
Yes, I got the email saying you're running a little bit behind.
No, I think it because it's on the 14th of Feb, which is Valentine's Day. There is something they've done this survey about how Swedes do Valentine's shopping. And that's so there's a payments topic around how Valentine's shop. I thought the most striking thing in that survey was the fact that how few Swedes actually do shop for Valentine to begin with. I mean, it's like I think a third was like, "What do you mean? I'm not going to buy anything for Valentine's. What's that all about?" So we have to behave.
No, you don't have to behave, but that really.
Don't take your shirt off. So.
Yeah, I think that comes down to how well you want to be represented, right?
Yeah, no, I like to do well behave.
Okay, fantastic. So in that case, Chris, you ready to go?
Yep.
Ville, you ready to go? Okay.
Welcome to Fintech Daydreaming, the podcast that dives into the world of banking technologies and the ever-changing landscape of fintech companies. We bring you real-life examples from global and local thought leaders, as well as experts working within the financial industry, and seek out the best stories from the front lines of financial services innovation, where dreams of industry pioneers meet reality. Hosted by Krogdahl and Ville Sointu. This is Fintech Daydreaming.
Hello and welcome back to another fantastic episode of Fintech Daydreaming. We are again, as always, going to dive deep into the world of what is exciting, what is interesting, and what is happening these days around fintech, embedded banking, open banking, and everything else that we can think of along this journey of the next, 40 minutes or whatever ends up being. As always, I am Krogdahl, and I would not be able to do this without my partner in fintech, partner in crime, my shared glasses man, Ville himself. Ville, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Getting the year is well on its way, and I think always feels like the time is going faster, like we talked last time. Still feels like that. It's already almost mid-February, and getting up to a very busy event streak. So there's going to be a lot of events we're going to be taking part of, both you and me. And the big one, of course, being the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, end of February. So yeah, a lot of preparation to be done, and really looking forward to all of these appearances in these events, and hopefully hope to see many of your listeners as well, meet you face to face in these events.
Absolutely, yes, I think so. And with the weather being all weird, it does feel like things are moving towards summer a lot faster than it has done in previous years, I have to admit. So I agree with that. And like you said, lots of conferences and events coming up for us all to get new insights from and new experiences as always, and maybe one or two interesting parties and dinners in the evening. But let's move on to the really cool part of the day. We've got Christoffer with us here today. And for those who don't know who he is, you should be ashamed of yourselves. This guy is the mastermind behind SEB Embedded, SEBx. He has taken the world of embedded finance, embedded banking to a whole new level. So, Christoffer, why don't we just start with a quick introduction? Let our listeners know who you are, where you've come from, how you've ended up where you are today, and most importantly, what's your superpower?
Wow. Thank you, Paul and Ville, for having me. I am taken aback by that introduction. I think somebody said flattery could never get too exaggerated, and I think this time you really nailed it. So thank you ever so much for that over-the-top introduction. Great to be here. Thanks for having me as a guest. I completely concur with your view, Ville, on the passage of time, which seems to be accelerating, although we know that technically it's not. There is no doubt that there's something going on there, because time does really move faster than I can ever imagine that it's done in the past. So so my name is Christoffer Malmer. I am running SEB Embedded right now, and if I look back, in my rearview mirror, I come from the sort of craft of banking more than technology. Even though I would argue, we'll come back to that. I'm sure that technology is, of course, an absolutely integral piece of I think where banking is heading and what we're doing with SEB Embedded. But I'm born and raised in banking, studied finance, worked for a number of years at Goldman Sachs in London as a banks analyst. I worked for a hedge fund a couple of years investing in banks. And then joined SEB covering banks as a client coverage individual. So, and then worked in the wealth management division and then ran the retail part. And then a bit more than 4 years ago, 4.5 years, coming up to 5 years ago, started what then became SEBx. And we'll talk more about it, but really the essence and the initiative was born out of the fact that we found ourselves in a disruptive phase of our industry. And I think, we still are. But if you go back to then those years where we were 4 or 5 years ago, finding ourselves in a position where we saw a lot of things happening around us in fintech, in customer behavior, in regulatory changes, technology acceleration, all of these things kind of blending together into some sort of perfect storm. And in so many occasions, we're finding ourselves as an incumbent institution. I work at SEB, which has been around since 1856. So, we've had a fair amount of legacy been built over the years. But at the same time, a very long and proud history and tradition of helping, corporate and individuals with banking across our markets for decades, coming up to centuries. So, of course, coming from that background, seeing the world changing and being committed and dedicated to be here for another 156 years, we realized that we need to do things differently. And rarely is it because of a lack of willingness or commitment or strategic direction that we can't get things done as quickly as we would have liked, but we find ourselves sometimes slowed down by not just kind of a technology legacy, but also by processes, structures, ways we've been set over the years. And I think it's a very familiar description. I think not just to banks, but to large organizations in general. I think there's, a lot of research written on this topic, all the way from the innovator's dilemma to case studies about corporate innovation and transformation. And finding ourselves in that position, we said, look, we're going to do a lot of things. We're going to be transforming ourselves. We're going to be investing in agile. We're going to be investing in fintech. We're going to be spreading our chips across the table just to ensure that we are future-proofing ourselves as well as we can. And one of those initiatives was to say, let's start SEBx, which is really working at the fringe of the organization, set ourselves up as if we were to start a bank from scratch. What would it have looked like? And letting that entity loose. That which is one of many initiatives that started in that accelerating phase of our industry transformation. And we can talk more about how we then came to become SEB Embedded. But so my background coming from banking, finance, and following the industry very intimately for many years, and now having the absolute privilege to where I find myself really at the intersection between banking and technology, and the opportunities and the possibilities that really present themselves right now, I think, as our industry continues to transform at a high pace.
Since we're talking about the origin story of SEBx before we move on to SEB and Embedded and things that are happening right now, I mean, we've talked a lot about banking innovation and especially innovation in banks in our podcast here. And as a former recovering banker myself, I got to ask the question a little bit from the beginning of SEBx. Yeah. Basically, how did you do it? I mean, everybody's talking about starting a bank within a bank from scratch. Everybody's thinking it's a great idea to have this called speedboat approach, where you do something from scratch and then have the freedom to create your own culture and things like this. So 2 questions really. Again, how did you do it? And did you model that based on something else that you saw outside of SEB? Or did you invent the methods as you went along?
Yeah, great question, Ville, and you're spot on. I mean, this is one thing that really looks brilliant. I remember the first slide presentations, or the presentations we had to the management team and the board about what this was going to look like. And if you put on a slide the strength of an incumbent and the opportunities of a fintech or a nimble agile player, and you blend them together, it's like, hey, this is just too good to be true. You got all the things: the capital, license, data, customers, financial muscles, expertise, and all that stuff. And you blend that with new tech, agility, curiosity, challenger mindset. What could possibly go wrong? But exactly to your point, I'm sure this doesn't just apply to financial institutions, but running something like this of a disruptive nature inside a large organization, the fabric, it just isn't, set up for that kind of operation. So I think in our experience, maybe one of the really important things to have in place to your first question, how do we do it? I think it was to have a clear and strong, dedicated commitment from the management and from the board to say that this is something that we would like to do. And in that process, and I think our CEO, Johan Torgeby, has been very adamant from the beginning to keep this at the fringe of the organization. And as much as it is tempting to apply things or try and draw on things and influence what's happening in an entity like this, because there's so many opportunities. It's like, hey, we can do all these things, and there's so many ideas and thoughts and reflections of what could be done in a setup like that, but really allowing the entity to find its way and its path. So I think establishing from the beginning a very clear setup to say this sits I report directly to the CEO, so it sits organizational governance wise outside of the existing organizations. It's not under a division, so kept separately at the fringe. I think that's a really important one. A clear dedication and commitment from the top, not exactly what's going to come out, but that we are going to give it a go. And that just deciding to give it a go. And to your point, we talked a lot about this before it actually happened. We went to all the kind of cliche trips to the Silicon Valley, getting, large organization goes and get influenced by all these exciting companies, and they'll give you inspiration. But at the end, we said, let's just do it, and we'll see what comes out of it. I think that is the pivotal moment when you say, let's just give it a go. And my experience, and I'm really happy to share. I have a great opportunity to talk to a lot of other banks about our experience and other banks' experiences. But it's just really that moment when you decide to go, all the things that starts to happen when you actually do that. They're so hard to predict. They really are. I mean, there's so many things that come out of this that were by no means part of the plan. And there's been turns and twists in the road, and we can come back to those. But just the fact that you're getting yourself set up and started. So, we started this out, and I raised my hand and said, if we're really doing this, I would be delighted to go for it. And at that point, being responsible for one of the operating divisions, and then setting myself in a small conference room with myself, and then starting to say, okay, I need a team. So we started to put together a small team, and we were 7 people from the very beginning in a small conference room in one of our offices here in Stockholm, with no brief, no direction, no plan. The only thing we said is that we want to explore new tech and we want to build new products. That was it. I mean, that was really it. And sometimes, banks rarely do things without having a plan. We rarely do things without a steering committee and a project plan and milestones. And, that's how we normally do things. And we do that well. So doing something which is then out of the comfort zone, out of the normal operating. And just as an example, when we announced this to the market, this was in the Q1 release in 2018. We had it under other items. Somewhere at the very end, it said, and this new initiative to call SEBx. I think apart from the auditors, I don't think anyone ever read that announcement. I'm a banks analyst by historically, and you rarely come to that part of the quarterly results presentation. So this was not a big comfortable announcement. Hey, we're doing this thing, and we want to, this can become that. It's like, we're doing this thing, and let's not make too much noise about it, because it was just an uncomfortable thing for us to do. And that, to your point, to your second question, what would we look at or model this on or get inspired by? I think it was just that wealth of insights that exists in so many parts of I think both our industry and others, that if you want to go about and try and drive more disruptive innovation, you need to take a different mindset. And it's hard to expect a line organization to do things radically different if they are not steered and developed and modeled on things on disruptive innovation. And again, I look at myself, my previous job in the retail business, the choice between investing in something that could immediately improve my, let's say, growth in the mortgage business, or add more savings volumes, or hire advisors to bring in more savings assets, which would give me a return on that investment immediately, versus spending money on something that may or may not become something interesting down the road, around the corner, without not really knowing what. I think it's hard to expect a line organization in any organization to make that. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense when I'm evaluated and the stock market evaluates me on my quarterly profits and my growth and my numbers to prioritize those kind of opportunistic, potentially, disruptive and more radical, innovative initiatives. So I think it just, again, conceptually, it makes so much sense to separate these two and then put something on the side and let it go. And I think just that first thing, going from that idea to just letting it happen. And I'm sure that every organization will have their own ride when they actually do it. But I think just that crossing that line and just letting this thing go. That was a very long answer, Ville, but it's you're just hitting the very essence of this whole initiative with your question.
Indeed, and I won't say that I got some PTSD from something you just said there. So let's move on, Paul.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because you're not the only ones that have attempted to do this, but many that have attempted to do it have failed. And one of the things that you said there at the beginning, which was interesting, around just getting into a room, not having a clear direction, you're going to build some products. A lot of the sort of neo-banks or sidelined banks that have been started off, digital banks, have focused very much on retail banking and realized that there is no real return on that growth. You guys, though, took a slightly different direction. You went first for the SME market, right? Was that a decision you made right from the start, or was that more as an accidental development as you moved forwards?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting observation. I'll answer your question. I think just firstly, when you said that there's a lot of examples that have failed, I'm not sure if I would necessarily agree with the description. I think a lot of organizations have learned a lot from this.
Yeah.
I mean, I take one example across the Atlantic, JP Morgan, that launched Fin as a challenger, and then when they discontinued that, there was a lot of talk around, oh, you can't do that as an incumbent bank. It doesn't make sense. Now they're launching Chase UK, tremendously successfully, growing really rapidly, north of 1 million customers, great customers. So I think that Fin initiative was a very important learning, I think, as an organization, which markets, how does it work, you're incumbent, So I think that all these initiatives, whichever direction they end up, and I look at, NatWest in the UK launching both bow and metal, learning from all these things, tech-wise, business-wise, and now they are actually, as you know, stepping into banking as a service in a joint venture. So I think there are so many learnings to be had from all of these things. But which way do you move forward? I think that from our perspective, why did we end up in the small business segment as our first product? We had that dual purpose of exploring tech and building new products. It sounds relatively kind of mundane, but I think what really the essence was to say that by that we said explore new tech, because that's the piece for the rest of the bank, which is important as well. If we are going to build a bank, we build it in the cloud. We don't run the rest of the bank natively in the cloud. So what would you do if you built a bank in the cloud? So that whole tech exploration, tremendously important for the rest of the bank. And then you say build new products. All of a sudden you introduce a very important element, which is the commercial element. So this is not an exploration journey. This is not just a laboratory. We say, hey, cloud is cool, AI is cool. What can we do? That's like, no, I want to be evaluated on revenues and profits. So there was from the beginning a clear direction of building a business, which then meant that the team started thinking, where do we think we have an underserved segment? Where do we think? We were even using the Sequoia pitch book template to say that if you're going to go to Sequoia and raise money, what are the questions you need to answer? What will you be evaluated on? So we need a business proposition, a value proposition that should be able to go out and raise money on its own 2 feet. So that's where we ended up with the small business segment or the self-employed, where we felt that, hey, here's something that is really underserved. And we felt there was a real opportunity to be data-driven, small tickets, but large size, which means that it can't be, you can't spend, too much manual intervention on these things because it's hard to make that profitable. So there was a number of reasons we felt that this is really some place where we think we can make a difference with a new approach to technology. But from the beginning, since we had that dual purpose, we always said that, hey, under this value proposition for the small business, we're building a platform. And this is where this technology exploration comes in. That this platform, and I went back to one of my very first presentations we did internally as well, and I said, look, we didn't call it the banking as a service platform, didn't really exist as a concept back then. We talked about I think it was called something like a scalable core, an API-driven scalable core or something like that. And then we said, look, we want to be able to build new products in SEBx. We want the group to be able to leverage this, and we want to be able to see if we can have external parties building on this platform. So by launching that first product for self-employed, just as you're alluding to, that was kind of our own validation that, hey, it kind of works. We can get into production faster than if we would have built anything in our traditional organization, simply because of the ability to monitor this and to contain it to a much smaller entity. Get to market, get into production, see how it means to operate the bank in the cloud, and all the spillover effects that came out of that, which led to a strategic partnership with Google. That's something that the rest of the bank is leveraging today. Investing in a company called Thought Machine to build our core banking ledger, an investment in a company that we're working closely with for the rest of the group as well. So you had, for a startup, a completely over-calibrated backend and a platform to validate the concept, which was unquote, the user experience. So basically, when we're into the market, we're kind of in parallel building a value prop for the target market and trying to prove the concept of that scalable platform.
You mentioned there both Google Cloud. You also mentioned Thought Machine. I mean, we've had Thought Machine on this show repeatedly and spoken to them several times. How important do you think your choice of tech stack has been to your success? If you'd gone with a old basic traditional core banking platform rather than the engineering-led approach from Thought Machine and deployed it onto the existing infrastructure that SEB has got, do you think you would have been just as successful, or do you think that was a fundamental key in your success?
I would say, I think from the very outset, I think we had an over-reliance on what technology was going to do for us. I think we went in with a mindset thinking that if we only get to work with new tech, all these challenges that we have will go away. So that in that sense, an over-reliance, because technology is a critical enabler. So to answer your question, yes, they have been critical in enabling what we want to do, in enabling speed, in enabling cloud native infrastructure and everything that comes with that. No. So yes, that has been critical, but that has been in combination with a new way of working, building and thinking and organizing the teams differently, and in so many other ways. And ultimately, these are people that are building these things, using these tools, and leveraging their capabilities. Yeah. So I think that in hindsight, I would have said that I should have had an even greater reliance on the capable individuals that are actually able to build and leverage on those technological enablers. But short answer, I think we were really from the outset saying that we want to look at things that's going to give us a more of a future-proofing opportunity, building on something that we think is going to last, and getting us speed, getting us flexibility, getting us scalability. And in that sense, yes, those have been very important components.
So new bank, new technology on cloud, building everything out from scratch. I mean, a lot of people would be sitting there wondering, so what was your time to value? What would you say, how quickly did you manage to get up to a point where you had return on investment? Because I think that's a critical element for a lot of banks when they're looking at doing things like this.
Absolutely. And this is I think it's a very, very important point. And the question is, how do you evaluate? Yeah. What is the ultimate evaluation metric for this? And I think when we look at those two dimensions, again, in the dual purpose, explore tech and build new products. In the build new products, it's a relatively straightforward yardstick. You could look at customers onboarded, revenues, value of contract signed, annual recurring revenues. Those are the things that you could evaluate the business aspect of this relatively straightforwardly. Now, the other part of things, which are then the technology exploration, the things that come in, for example, an investment in Thought Machine wasn't part of what we initially had planned to be in the SEBx exploration, and everything that's come with working closely with a cloud native core banking ledger and what that means for the how we accelerate the journey for the bank. The strategic partnership with Google, procurement processes have been redesigned. The whole KYC and onboarding model we've taken in fresh take on, which again is something that we're spreading in the rest of the organization. We have made other investments in other companies as we have advanced. And everything, and the talent that we have, I'm tremendously proud that we've been able to recruit as part of the SEBx initiative. So the employer branding and also the internal messaging to say that, hey, we're doing a lot of things to future-proof this bank. Here's yet another initiative and something that we are allowing us to both tap into the fintech scene and be in a conversation like this on this very podcast. So all those other things that are the payoffs for the broader organization and the broader brand and our general transformation agenda, those are much harder to put a number on. But I am adamant that we need to evaluate this on a return on investment in the traditional sense as well. So yes, it is great that we were awarded one of the best financial innovation labs by Global Finance Awards last year, and we're proud and excited about that, and all the effects that we get as kind of ripple effects on the things that we're doing. But ultimately, we're building a business for shareholders and shareholder value creation. And with SEB Embedded, we have a very clear agenda on a path to profitability. And the same thing with Unquo, the offering for self-employed to find its path to profitability. So I think they always need to be there. And I think it is an important aspect. And again, we've never done this before. We're looking and talking to a lot of other banks that are doing, as you're alluding to, other type of initiatives. And if I would have done this over again, I would definitely have been very conscious to keep that part of the initiative, that there needs to be a return on investment mindset on what we do and a constant evaluation. Say, okay, so now what is the business plan? We're going to pivot. That's fine. And for most of the fintechs I follow, we've invested in and we're talking to, quite rarely do they end up where they thought they would end up when they started. Again, that's something that's also a bit uncomfortable for a traditional incumbent institution. We do things, we plan, we do a study, and then we execute and we deliver and we do the milestones and we get to where we wanted to be and where we expected that we were going to end up.
Yeah.
Whereas the fintech journey is very often very different. So again, trying to allow that in a setting of an incumbent organization, I think is another aspect and a learning for us, is that allowing an entity to find its way. And I ask myself, we have with our first product, Unquo, for the self-employed, we're running with a couple of thousand customers today, and you could argue if this would have been a startup, what would have been the, how would we been evaluating that? Now, of course, if that would have had 2 million customers, where we would then have been on the build out of the embedded platform, etc. So there's so many things depending on how where the road takes you that ultimately requires you to constantly make new decisions.
So SEBx and SEB Embedded are part of SEB Bank. So I presume you're being regulated and supervised as part of SEB under their banking license.
Correct.
So this implies that you probably inherit a lot of the compliance and risk management processes from SEB that are relevant to being compliant with the banking regulations. But sometimes these things don't really mix well with this kind of innovation and tech-driven approach for next generation banking. So how have you navigated this existing incumbent compliance and risk processes and still maintain this time to market that you were talking about?
Yeah, no, it's another great avenue that you're opening up now, Ville, and I think this is so interesting because in our experience, this has been from the start an extremely close collaboration with all the control functions in the bank, with legal, with compliance, with risk, with credit, with all those organizations. Because what we found is that in those organizations, there's a wealth of experience and knowledge around the respective areas. And here we came from scratch to say that, okay, we're going to do transaction monitoring. And we're going to do how would we like transaction monitoring to work? We can get access to real-time data. We can get access to these new data sources. We can build this in a way. So all of a sudden, we're sitting with control functions, jointly innovating new things that we would, they would have liked to do. And they know much better how these things work than we do. But together with, taking a fresh pair of eyes on those, together with that experience, and the opportunity that comes with building from scratch a new tech, all of a sudden there were things coming out. So, a redesigned onboarding and KYC model was something that came out of this. And that was something that we felt that this is not taking shortcuts or bending rules. In fact, this is something that, if we would have done it today, that's probably how we would have built it. And that's with all that experience that we're getting from our different control functions. So in our experience, this has not been, we're trying to come up with something here and then we go and present it and try and convince, the control functions to allow us to do it, but rather getting on board together and saying that, okay, we can do this from scratch. How would we like to do it? So for us, that has been a really, really important. And I would argue that, we would not have come up with the things we did had we not had access to that experience. So that's really where I think, if we go back to that very first slide, the strength of the incumbent and the kind of fintech agility, that's where that blends really well, I think, when you can tap into all that experience and knowledge.
So I assume based on that, what you're really saying is for SEBx, when you look at the fintechs, they are friends, they're not foe.
Totally.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I find, maybe, and I'd say maybe this goes back a couple of years, but, it's been a popular polarization between incumbents and fintech. And, some fintechs, of course, would like to say that, hey, banks are going to go out of business and we're going to be the future. And I think many observers like to portray it as the one versus the other. But in our experience, I have very rarely had, a fintech not wanting to talk to us. Saying that, we're not going to do business. It's a constructive conversation, and there's exploration of all sorts of opportunities, be it technology ones, be it partnerships, be it investments. So our experience is that that's definitely a very healthy relationship.
Fantastic. Help our listeners just to clarify the branding differences here, right? SEB is the traditional bank, been in Sweden, known across the world. It's very old. Well, we won't say very old, but it's been around for a long time. Then you've got SEBx, and then you've got SEB Embedded. Mm-hmm. Is SEB Embedded a rebranding of SEBx, or are they two different parts? How do these pieces fit together?
Yeah, so I'll take you through that. So basically then what happened from that SEBx inception, we started building that platform. That's part of the technology exploration. We launched our first product on the platform, and we started to get to the next phase to say that, okay, so let's see what more we can run on this platform. So we started setting up a small team in the bank that's building the next generation of mobile apps for young customers. And we said, hey, what if we could build this on this new technology stack? And to your point previously, Ville, we're on the same balance sheet. We are the same regulated entity. So for all intents and purposes, SEB Embedded, SEBx, SEB, that's the same legal entity. So, SEBx came to the point where we then had the first product in the market, started to scale the platform, and then we signed our first external banking as a service customer, which is a Swedish retail conglomerate called Axel Johnson. And they wanted to venture into financial services to build, get closer to their customers, get access to more data, and build a loyalty program. And they wanted to use financial services on that journey. So this was really our opportunity then to see, okay, now so we've built banking as a service in a way for ourselves with our first product. We're now looking at exploring that as part of the bank's next generation of products. And now we open it up for an external distributor. And when we made that public, and this was in Q1 of last year, we announced that, hey, we're building a platform and it's going to be available for banking as a service. That was really a trigger point when we started to get a lot of very exciting conversations about bringing this into the marketplace. So come sort of autumn last year, we felt that, okay, so right now it feels like we have enough to do, we have more to do than we can cater for right now. And that kind of exploration part of which was initially the initiative with SEBx, we felt that, if we're going to try and grab this opportunity that is embedded finance, embedded banking, and banking as a service, that's going to have to be our full focus right now. So then we said that we probably can't keep that exploration. We're probably moving away from exploration more to commercialization. So we had again a conversation with our CEO, and he said, why don't we put this into business unit, and with a clear mandate to scale and grow banking as a service and embedded finance. That became SEB Embedded. But then we said, this whole experience with SEBx has just been very rewarding in so many different ways. Things that we talked about before that we didn't expect, and things that we didn't foresee. So why don't we start SEBx all over again? Right. So from SEBx came the team, the tech, and everything, and myself, starting SEB Embedded. Left is nothing in SEBx, and we set a new, then it was Christoffer Malmer. Now his name is Nicola Mock, who used to be the CIO of the bank. He now takes exactly that same role as I did 4.5 years ago, alone in that conference room in somewhere in Stockholm, thinking about, okay, I'm going to explore new tech and build new products. What does that mean in 2023? What's around the corner? What's really the new and avant-garde things that are going to change the banking industry down the road? Things like AI look very different today compared to 4 or 5 years ago. Building a bank in the cloud was adventures. Now it's kind of probably what most people would do today. So maybe that's not the next generation. Maybe there's something else. And maybe there's something on blockchain technology, or maybe there's something else that is advanced over the years that we've been building that now is around the corner. So I thought it was really exciting to say that, okay, what came out of SEBx? Well, Embedded, we're trying to scale that, and Quo, trying to scale that, and let's just start SEBx all over again and see what comes out in the kind of the 2.0 version.
I think you've created one of the best job adverts in the world here, right? You're gonna have techies like Ville and I from the world knocking your door down, trying to get a job in the future of SEBx and SEB Embedded and whatever fantastically interesting start from scratch activities you guys will be doing going forwards.
Oh, that would be fantastic. We are hiring, so don't hesitate to head over to our career page.
Okay,
fantastic. Listeners, you heard that first here on Fintech Daydreaming. SEB Embedded and SEBx are looking for the brightest and the best. So hop on over and contact Chris. He'll give you a job if you are one of the best.
Yeah, just
absolutely.
Quick comment. I really love. Yeah, I really love this reinventing the whole thing. So creating something that was successful and then not being afraid of starting from scratch again, to again almost do a rebirth of the whole thing again. That's incredible. I've never actually heard of something like that in a financial institution at all. So it's really looking forward to seeing where this journey takes you.
Yeah, we're really excited to see what comes out of the next version.
We're heading rapidly towards the end of our time. Like we always say, you run out of time way too fast when you're having these sort of fun discussions.
I thought we were halfway by now.
Well, I mean,
me too.
We'd love to have this discussion for another couple of hours. So let's grab some beers and sit down and continue the discussion, right? But I'm actually just wondering if I could ask as a final question, if you did it all again, what would you do differently? I know you're saying you're going to do it all again, but so what are you going to do differently?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there is no question that there's been so many learnings over this journey that we look back and we say, oh, surely we could have done that differently, or surely, and this road has been rocky. And, I say, software development is not for the faint-hearted. I mean, when I was in my previous jobs as a, running more of the operate the business side of a bank, when you hear about these technology things not working, you're like, what's going on? It's like, what? But then you're working so much closer to it, you realize these things happen all the time, and things go down and things go wrong, and you fix it. But my initial mindset was so much more kind of what do you mean it's not working? Do we need to rebuild everything or redo it, or should we just close it all down? It's like no, these things just happen. So that you're blending that mindset of a that software development mindset with a banking and business mindset, and that has been a constant learning journey for us. And again, technology choices that we've had to reverse, directions we've taken that we had to reverse, explorations that we've done that we've learned a lot from. But that's I'm just really coming back to that thing. These are learnings all the time that takes us forward, and having the stamina and the commitment and the determination to just keep going, because things for sure are going to go wrong. And again, it's so easy to say this, that you learn from your mistakes and you fail fast, and that's good learnings. But when it happens, nobody likes it. I mean, it's not fun. And it's in the gut reaction, and particularly keep in mind, in a large regulated organization where fines are big and controls are massive, when things go wrong, the gut reaction is like, oh, so who did this? Who said this? To genuinely step away from that and say, okay, so what can we learn from this, and how do we take this forward? Yeah, it's so easy to say, but I just have to remind myself all the time that it's a process, and it's a something that we're having constantly to think about. So one other example, which again in hindsight it's kind of ridiculous. When we launched our first product, Unquo on the platform, being a large bank, launching into the cloud with customer data, I think we were the first bank in our part of the world to have live production customer data on a public cloud. So there was, of course, a lot of sort of controls and checks and balances on this. We'd had the conversation with the FSA. It was going to be small and everything. And then we were like, okay, so what if we launch this into the App Store and it really explodes? And we're going to get so many customers. So we're like, hey, we need to build something into this so we can stop the inflow of new customers. And you just like, which fintech spends time on designing and building things that's going to stop the inflow of new customers? And you look back and it's like, but that's what we did. And we launched, and hey, surprise, surprise, we did not get inundated. And yeah, we kind of managed the number of customers that came in. But that's sort of again, learning and blending those two worlds that are just doesn't naturally gel in all aspects. And back to your point, Ville, yes, working closely with control functions, that's been extremely valuable, but also recognizing that a GDPR fine for us is a percentage of the revenues over the group, because we're part of the group. A GDPR fine, if I spin out and start on the street with zero revenues, a GDPR fine is going to be zero. So the risk reward equation inevitably is going to look different. So yes, you can take more risks if you're a startup, yeah, but sometimes it actually makes more sense to take more risks. And it's not because large institutions are too afraid always, or too kind of they don't get it. It's like sometimes it just doesn't make risk reward sense to take the kind of risks that you were to take if you were not part of a large organization. So it's striking that balance, and that's a constant balance for us to strike. And I look at if you look at some examples in the startup world where things go too fast, and all of a sudden there's all sorts of regulatory conversations and all sorts of investigations and things, and then you like tilted too much on that way. And then you look at other parts of the world where things just don't go fast enough, and then you tilt it too much in that direction. So striking this balance, and there's so many examples of things where we tilted too much in the one direction or the other, and that for sure there's an easy another episode that we can spend and just talking about all those mistakes that we've done.
Then we will invite you back for another episode, but unfortunately this time we've come to the end. And I suppose thank you very much for joining us. If the listeners want to know more about SEBx, SEB Embedded, apply for those jobs that you've got, how can they get in contact with you?
Yeah, so there are SEBx.io is the page for and /career for those opportunities. And then we have SEBembedded.com, a fresh webpage launched actually probably about 10 days ago or so. So it still says coming soon, but the one thing we have up on that page is the career page. So that's the most important thing to keep building and investing in our brilliant talents. And then for if you're self-employed and you want to try the Unquo product, that's unquo.com.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us on Fintech Daydreaming. It's been an incredible discussion. Learned an awful lot. I think I'm even more excited now about what you guys are doing with SEB Embedded than I was before. And, I personally, whenever I'm presenting, I do actually use SEBx as a great example for doing things right. I just hope you guys continue to prove me right in that journey and continue to grow. So thank you.
We'll do our best. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. And we need to wave that flag for Nordic Fintech, right? So let's keep doing that. But to the rest of our listeners, thank you very much for sticking with us for another episode. I really hope that you've enjoyed this as much as Ville and I have done. And go and check out what they are doing with SEBx, SEB Embedded and everything else. Ville and I will be back in 2 weeks' time for another episode. But until then, this has been Fintech Daydreaming.
This is Fintech Daydreaming.